So we are live. Thank you so much, viewers, for joining us. Today we have a very special guest with us. We have Indian film scholar joining us from Jugu Abraham, who is the author of the famous movie blog, Movies That Make You Think. And thank you so much, Jugu sir, for taking the time out and doing this for us.
It's a pleasure
It's a
always.
pleasure always, Murtaza.
So to begin the conversation, let me give you a little background about Jugu Abraham sir. He used to be a film critic with the Hindustan Times group back in the 70s and 80s. And during his stint with the group, he interviewed some of the leading film and, not just film, I should say, even art, theater, culture personalities. And he would even do interviews for All India Radio, and he has traveled over 50 countries, and he has been lucky enough, fortunate enough to have interviewed the likes of the great Polish filmmaker Krzysztof Kieslowski. He has interviewed the great Turkish filmmakers, including the likes of Semi Kaplanoglu, and he has been really keen voice on cinema. And when I say of cinema, for the last 5 decades or so, he has been actively covering cinema. He has been keeping himself abreast with the latest developments happening in cinema. So, one of the very few voices around the world who has been able to do so for the last 4 or 5 decades, right from the 70s till date, he keeps an eye on what goes around in cinema circles around the globe. That's very, very exceptional, because I have always come across people who have a command over cinema when it comes to cinema of the classic era. Then there are people who keep a very keen eye on the contemporary developments in cinema. But Jugu sir is one of the very few personalities around who is able to keep a keen eye on the constant development of cinema for over 5 decades now. This session, I would be talking less, and I'll be asking sir to do most of the talking, because through this session, I'll request him to touch upon his understanding of cinema, his understanding of the importance of a film critic in today's times, the art of doing a film review. How do you approach it beyond the idea of talking about performances and talking about just the film's plot? So before I go into, because that will be a sort of a workshop and a masterclass sort of an approach once we enter that zone. But to begin with, sir, why don't you brief our viewers a little about your journey, how it all began, how it all started, and what got you hooked to the movies in the first place?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction.
Let me start.
With the first few
introductions
to my world of film criticism.
It all started
probably
in
1970 when I was still a student
in
Darjeeling.
I was in a
boarding school
called St.
Joseph's North Point,
where they used to
show films for the students.
And one of the
films which they showed me
was a film
called Uncle Tom's Cabin.
And it was
actually directed by
a Hungarian
director
who actually made a lot of films in Germany later. And I was very impressed by that film. Even though it was a disaster on the box office. But I decided to write for my school
magazine. Because there was something that
was very
interesting for.
It was based on
Harry Pichetto's
story about
slaves and slave masters
in the US. But at the end of the film, there was a shot of the Manhattan skyline with Eartha Kitt singing the song Old Mississippi. So I wrote about this in the school magazine. And my headmaster, who was a Canadian Jesuit,
read it,
read
and
it,
called me
and
over
called me
to
over
his
to
office.
his office.
And I was
And I was
absolutely shaking with
absolutely
fear,
shaking with fear.
because when you're called
Because when you're
to your
called to your
headmaster's
headmaster's office,
it's either bad
it's
news
either
or you're
bad
in
news
trouble.
or you're in trouble.
But he
Asked,
told me that he had just
that
read
he had
the
just
review
read the review
and was very
and
impressed
was
with what
very
I
impressed
wrote.
with what I wrote.
And he said that
And
you
he
should have
said
a
that
very
you
good
should have a
gift,
very good gift,
and you should
and you
not
should
lose it.
not lose it.
And he gave
And
me
he
his
gave me his
personal
personal
copy of a book
a book
called Kiss
called
Bang
Kiss Kiss Bang
of film reviews by the famous film
the
critic
famous film critic
Pauline
Pauline
Kael
Kael for the New
Yorker.
Yorker.
That
That
small
small
incident
incident
changed my life.
changed my life.
I took up film criticism
quite seriously.
And ever since
And
then,
ever since then, I was interested
in writing
something about films
beyond the story,
beyond the story,
and
and
explain to
people who are viewing
a film
to
look for something else.
something else.
And that was a very
interesting journey.
And so I became
a film critic
very luckily
at
the Hindustan
Times.
It's not easy
to become a film critic,
but I had very good editors and news editors who found that I was capable of doing this job. And so I started writing about films. And when I started writing about films, people who were seriously interested in cinema and film criticism started looking at what I was writing. And it eventually led to a wonderful. I was invited to places outside India to interview film directors.
Amazing.
And this was a great help. I was invited to Budapest to interview one of the best directors at that time, Zoltan Fabri. Because I had expressed my interest in meeting him.
One of the all-time greats, in fact.
And the Hungarian embassy in Delhi thought it was a very good opportunity, and I should be called there. And I was not only able to interview this wonderful gentleman, I was also able to interview Miklos Jansson.
Wow.
Both these people were hardly ever interviewed by the Western press. And here was an Indian going out there, and they were quite interested in finding an Indian knowing so much about Hungarian cinema. So that was the beginning of my long history of film criticism.
And you also told me about your IMC stint. How that helped you?
Well, the IMC stint was only helping me to get my first job. I really didn't find much that I had to learn, except from the library. Which had a lot of good books on film, and they had a small collection of films, like Robert Flaherty's Man of Aran, and that was the kind of films that I was interested in.
Here I want to touch upon an interesting aspect of Sir's journey, that he got selected for IPS, if I'm not wrong, Indian Police Service, and you chose to become a critic and not take up a career, such a lucrative career, such a prestigious career. You gave up on that to follow your passion and to become a full-fledged film critic.
Well, Murtaza, if I became a cop, I would have looked like a keystone cop. I was not meant to be a cop. So I knew that was not the line I would like to. So luckily, I already had a job in Hindustan Times, and I never joined. Took up the Indian Police Service.
So moving on, towards the business end of this conversation, wherein I would like you to take up this as a workshop mode, sort of a masterclass, wherein you'll be talking about different aspects of writing a film review. So after taking this break in the mid 80s, where you went through a complete career shift, you moved towards management, and you got into after doing your MBA, you got into UN centric schemes, and you did some interesting work there. We'll keep that discussion for some other time. But once you launch your blog, in the mid 2000s, and it again picked up, and you started reviewing films that nobody had heard of, at least in India. So till date, it's 2021. So it's been 15 years, and your blog has been running, and you are regularly quoted by some of the leading filmmakers, some of the leading journals. Film scholars are now quoting your work. They are using it as part of their thesis. So tell me, what was the need, or what was the urge that get you started with this blog? Why would you want to review a film through a blog at a time when blogging was not even, a very popular profession or a vocation? Probably it was the early days of blogging, and film blogging was unheard of, I'm sure, around the 2000s. So what was the urge behind it?
A very pertinent question, Murtaza. If you look into my blog, I am not talking about film criticism. As you see a film. Because I am arguing there that the understanding of a film doesn't stop when you leave the theater. You have to reflect on the film, what you have seen. And then you can probably understand much more. And the ability to get entertainment from this film can continue. And it can probably lead you to look at the film again. Maybe it is a question of time, where you can look at some of the books which is discussing the film. And then you understand that you might have missed something while you're watching in the theater. And that's really where you get a lot of extended entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided to discuss not just every film that I've seen, but those kind of films that could make you reflect. In order to understand the medium, understand the people who have invested time to make the film.
Mm-hmm.
And also to understand the various aspects which the film is giving you when you are watching it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I started writing my 250 odd films. And you'll notice that the kind of films that I have written about are films which give you a lot of interest beyond the story.
Very true.
For instance, recently I was on a Facebook post And one of the people who had commented on that
Facebook post
talked about an
American film called
The Swimmer, made in the
1968.
The Burt Lancaster film.
That's right. And
then
the person was
talking about
the actor and the words he spoke, but didn't know anything beyond that. Now that is where film criticism comes in. I had to explain in my blog, and actually I'd done it before this criticism came up on the Facebook. And I had stated that the most important element of the film was the script writer. Now the script writer was using a story of John Cheever, a very famous writer from USA. And he had published his short story in the New Yorker magazine. And today you can go back and read it online. And that's what I did. And when I wrote my review, I discussed how the scriptwriter, whose name was Eleanor Perry, who happened to be the wife of the director, was able to change the entire story by adding new characters and making certain incidents come forward and take some backwards. And you could have a very interesting film which is quite different and more entertaining than the original story. And very interestingly, I found out that Lancaster was very interested in the way the film was coming up. But its director and the studios didn't think much of it. In fact, the producer was Sam Spiegel, who was one of the most important producers of his day. He had already produced Lawrence of Arabia. He had produced the film David Lean called Dr. Zhivago.
Wow!
And he was also not impressed with this film, and the way it was being made. And he said, "I don't want my name on." So he also removed his name. And here was Burt Lancaster, who was now getting a bit worried about the way the director was making the film. And he got a new director to add on sequences. And that new director was somebody who you might know very well. Sidney Pollack.
Yeah, I've read the review on your blog actually. Otherwise, I would have never known it.
And the end product was so well written by the scriptwriter. And today it is now emerging as a very good example of good American cinema. So you can sometimes see how an actor can change a very good film. For instance, I'll let me tell you that Stanley Kubrick, while he was making his very famous Paths of Glory, twisted the arms of the famous director to change the initial ending. And what you see today in Paths of Glory is what Kirk Douglas wanted. and not what the director wanted. Now that's the kind of interesting stuff, interesting detail that can make good film review. And make the person who is watching the film to understand a little more about the processes and who actually contributed certain things. So usually when you hear a person say a story of the film was very good, it is actually the screenplay writer who has contributed quite a bit. And very often that is never expressed. It is often either the actor or the director who takes the credit. The screenplay writer is out of the scene. And as a person who's writing on film, I now find that it's very important to distinguish films which are made by the original scriptwriter. That story is made by the original script, and not an adapted one. And there are a lot of interesting filmmakers who are now making films with their original screenplays. And that's a distinguished. That's something that you have to distinguish for the audiences. Let me give you an example. There is a very famous director, and one of my favorites, called Andrei Zvyagintsev. He's from Russia. He made 5 films. And those 5 films have already got more than 70 awards worldwide. Now he writes his original stories, except in one case where he decided to adapt an existing novel. That film was called Banishment.
The second one,
the second one, and that was written by William Saroyan. Now William Saroyan's novel has the film showing the main women character slightly mentally unhinged, and the husband is the person who is perfect. Now this story was totally turned around by Zvyagintsev and his very good able co-scriptwriter called Oleg Negin. Now they have worked together for a lot. And that's the reason why the name of the film is called The Banishment, and not The Laughing Matter, which was what Saroyan had written for it. Now, if you look closely at it, at the beginning of the film, the wife is looking a bit unhinged. But towards the end of the film, you realize that the director and the scriptwriter has changed it all. And that is what makes the film very interesting. And then he adds on so many factors. There is political elements. There are social elements. Now these are things you can miss out unless critic points them out. And then viewer who has seen it and who found it very ordinary and probably something not very interesting.
I must here come in. Sorry for interrupting, but I must bring out your review of Mirror. The Tarkovsky film. And I remember reading it, and while I was reading it, you pointed out so many things that had the Soviet censorship at the time caught it, they would have definitely crucified Tarkovsky. So sometimes it's good that a critic is not able to find all these political undertones for the sake of
right.
the director trying to.
But I'm sure the people spotted some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't want. The people in the government didn't notice it. The censors would have stopped it.
Absolutely.
The particular thing that I would mention is which I wrote about is there was a picture of Trotsky hanging on the wall. At that time, Trotsky was not allowed to be appreciated. And here was Tarkovsky allowing the camera to go past that picture of Trotsky hanging on the wall.
And another thing that I read in your review, which nobody else in the world has pointed out about this boy who is stammering. Nobody has a clue what this boy is doing in the film. Why is he stammering? And through your review, I was able to, get into a whole new perspective into the film that, okay, this is a bigger commentary made by Tarkovsky, that this is the state of an artist in this regime, that he's been or she's been forced to stammer. He or she is not able to express himself or herself. And that's the very opening scene of the film.
Yeah, there were lots of things like that which would have befuddled quite a lot of the viewers. For instance, in this film, Mirror, one actress, the same actress is playing Tarkovsky's mother and his wife. So a person who doesn't know the difference, it would be quite confused. What is happening? And you have situations where some of them come up front, some come up later. And there are two marriages of Tarkovsky which are mentioned. And one is an earlier one, and the other one also. There is another one, similar one later. So when he talks about his son, which is the son that he's talking about. Now these are the things that a perceptive viewer might miss out. But a good critic can point out what is correct.
Another film that I would like you to comment upon is obviously Life of Pi. I remember when the film came out, you wrote a fantastic review and you were able to touch upon certain, and which helped me understand the film better, because I was a little, it left me a little cold, that film. Some of the things really were not able to, I was not able to connect with those things. But after I read your review and you touched upon certain aspects through your understanding of Martel's novel, those things really started making a lot of sense to me. So in the absence of a review like that, or in the absence of somebody having read the novel, that film or some parts of that film may not work. So how a review or how the reading of the book can help and maybe get a better perspective into the film is another interesting facet, that I would like you to touch upon. Because there in the Swimmer, it was at a different level, but here I think it's even more intimate, the relationship.
See, when you watch Life of Pi, there are animals who are eating things, and there should be a lot of blood and dirt on the bottom of a boat. And whenever you see the Life of Pi, the film, you find that the boat is sparkling clean. So you should be
you should be able to understand that there is something unusual here.
And that what is
being shown is
not reality. And that is what actually the case.
The case of an unreliable narrator.
Yes, but then the director probably wanted to show more.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, there is the character of the cook,
Mm-hmm.
played by Gerard Depardieu.
The great French actor.
In the film, he is there for a few minutes. But in the second part of the story, which is not shown visually but verbally, you find the cook has a totally different aspect to the story. Now, my guess is the studios didn't want to make it a very negative story. He wanted to make it a very family-oriented. So that kids could go and appreciate it with their parents. And if they had showed all those aspects of the film and the story, which Jan Martel, the author, had envisaged, you would have a lot less in the box office. So that is where it is very interesting how you make a film. If it's a conscious effort of Ang Lee, it's very interesting. But I don't think it was a conscious effort of Ang Lee.
Because the kind of films that he has made over the years, like I have seen films like Lust Question, and I really don't think that he's the kind of a filmmaker who would want to, take these conscious attempts to cut down on a lot of meat, both literally and figuratively speaking, and give us something which works superficially but which lacks the depth that the novel has. So I also would like you to comment upon, one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, in your list of great filmmakers. Very few people talk about him. The maker of Coral Lear, the Russian adaptation of King Lear, Gregory Kuznetsov. And I remember you once told me that at one point in time you wanted to do a PhD, in Kuznetsov and his body of work and his, his entire, canvas. So a little about him and what makes this film, because there are so many adaptations of Shakespeare out there, but for some reason, as far as I am concerned, this is right up there with the best. Not just King Lear's adaptation, but Shakespeare adaptation at large. This is right up there with the very, very best. And what is it about it that makes it work so better than some of the Western adaptations?
Well, there are several aspects to it.
Mm-hmm.
First is I knew the play,
mm-hmm.
and I was surprised at the end of the film,
mm-hmm.
the fool appears. If you read the play, Shakespeare had got rid of the fool in the fourth act of the 5 acts. There was no room for the fool. And here is both Kuznetsov and the co-script writer Boris Pasternak, who had got the Nobel Prize for his Dr. Zhivago. They decided that it's more rightful for the to appear at the end. Because if at all a king is dying and his close friend is around, he should be there at the deathbed, or even after he has died. So that's where he's brought in. And the second reason for bringing in the fool at the end was Kuznetsov had chosen his good friend Shostakovich, the famous composer. to
to
do
do an entire
musical score,
which was woodwind oriented.
And this
Flute
was always with
F
pipe or a
flute,
and
he would be
playing around with it. And so at the end
of this film,
you have the
Shostakovich's music
being played on flute by the
flute.
The third thing,
which was very important
for me, was to
see that nature
was a major
character
in
Kozlowski's King Lear.
Now Shakespeare
intended it.
But if you do a
play on a
proscenium
theater,
you can't show grasses
growing.
You can't have the wind, blowing the hair of the
Mad King.
All that was possible
only
on film, and that's what he
was able to do.
And a fourth thing, which is a small detail, which I noticed, that in the play there is no mention of Cordelia's father. That is the king. King's wife. But in the film, there is a wall hanging of an elderly lady. And Kozintsev shows that in the profile of his Cordelia. So you see so many things that have been added on, which Shakespeare never had thought of. Without changing a single word from the original play. And that is marvelous.
But sir, there are a lot of Western adaptations also taking place in the UK, in the US. But how come those people were not able to get these things sorted, or to put it in the right perspective? And how come a Soviet director was able to do so? So for him, the language is also non-native.
They were purists.
Lawrence Olivier would take up a Shakespeare.
He would stick to what Shakespeare
wanted to do on stage.
Okay.
And he would only think of getting a good actor of a good music.
Wow.
But not tinker further. And here in the
Russian version,
you have a Brogelian.
Bruegel is a famous
painter. Where there are lots
of poor people
populating his paintings. So this particular version of King Lear is very close to a Bruegel painting, where there are animals, people being pulled on carts, poor people who are very much part of the entire thing. It's just not courtiers alone who is making the story.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And a great actor at the center of it all. One of your favorite actors.
Absolutely.
Great Estonian actor.
It's not many people who know of Yuri Jarman. And it is very interesting again to know Murtaza, that after this film came out, you had Tarkovsky picking up this very same actor for his next film. Within months for Solaris. And so there was a big connection between Tarkovsky and Kozintsev. And I had the opportunity recently to talk to the famous director Sukharov, who had come to Trivandrum for a film festival.
Wow. The
And
director
had made a film called Kozintsev's House.
Wow.
Now,
Now,
I asked him.
I asked him.
I was asked, what was your relationship with this Kozintsev?
Kozintsev?
He said Kozintsev
He said
and I
never met.
But I was a great
friend of Kozintsev's wife,
who was a widow. And she always wanted help. And I would go there to help her out to sort out problems domestically. And he used that to make a film on Kozintsev's house.
Wow.
But then I said,
look, if
Kozintsev was so good, how is it that Tarkovsky, who had taken his favorite actor and used him, has never mentioned Kozintsev in his writing? And that's where another interesting thing came out. That Kozintsev was responsible for helping Tarkovsky in his difficult times with the government. And he had helped him in so many ways. And yet Tarkovsky never mentions Kozintsev.
Maybe he never wanted to mention his savior to them, otherwise the help would have stopped. You never know how difficult the situation would have been.
Maybe.
And Subrah was saying that is the most very unsavory thing. He should have mentioned something positive about a person who helped him. And again, Kozintsev not only helped Tarkovsky. He helped Boris Pasternak. Boris Pasternak was in trouble in Russia after he won the Nobel Prize for Dr. Zhivago. And immediately he asked Pasternak to help him on the two Shakespeare films that he made. That is Hamlet and King Lear. So Kozintsev was a person who helped people in trouble. And now there is luckily a resurgence of interest in Kozintsev. You find that films which were banned are now being found in walls in Switzerland. Recently, about 20 years ago, you had his famous film, silent film called Baby New Babylon.
New Babylon.
It was found and restored, and it is now shown as one of the finest silent films of 1929. Now, when people write about silent films, they hardly mention this film. But when you see it, you realize it's a gem. And similarly, I must say, Kozintsev had trouble not only in Russia, because he made a lot of films in the early period, which were outside Russia, which were talking about the good life in Paris. So he was banned for some time from showing those films. So he had to make films which were propagandistic.
Wow.
And they were called them three Maxim trilogy films. And when he made them, he made it very intelligent. But he got into trouble in the United States. In the United States, the Michigan police officer said that he can't show these films because it will get the people against the government of that time in the USA. So he was a person who got into trouble on both sides of the political line. But today we need to appreciate it.
Sir, I must also request you to touch upon a very important part of the filmmaking process, which is the music, the soundtrack, the scores. original songs. And in your reviews of all reviews that I get to read, you emphasize a lot on the use of original music. I remember how you once mentioned about Peter Weir and how he had a certain ear for music, and which is why I like his films like The Year of Living Dangerously, and how he used in the picnic or in the picnic at Hanging Rock, how he uses that Zamfir pan flute, which was later used by Sergio Leone in that beautiful theme in Once Upon a Time in America. So also take us through this understanding of music and how it helps to write better reviews or understand films better.
Yeah, many reviewers clump all types of music under one heading. Good music, bad music. But actually, music consists of three different segments. One is what I call the diegetic sound. Now, there are films which do not use music at all. And they just use the sound captured by the microphones. You had this in even Hitchcock. In Rear Window. You had everything with sounds which were real. No external music. This is again used by a Turkish filmmaker, Semih Kaplanoglu. His most famous film is called Honey, which won the top award in Berlin.
Part of the Yusuf trilogy.
The entire film doesn't have music. But you won't feel that there is no music. And that is because the director is able to use these details very well and intelligently. Now that's a very rare style. The second aspect of music is when you ask a composer to make music for that particular film. And you have these examples in Sergio Leone films, where you ask Ennio Morricone to make the music which is appropriate to the story. And so today we have a beautiful list of musical scores by Ennio Morricone for Sergio Leone. I mean, you have other directors also doing the same. You have one of my favorite directors, Gillo Pontecorvo.
Yeah. Kimada and
he used the music that he commissioned Ennio Morricone to make in a film called Quaimada, which was released in USA as Burn. Now that became a cult figure. And you have other directors also commissioning particular composers. For instance, David Lean would use Maurice Jarre for making his famous scores for Lawrence of Arabia, for Dr. Zhivago, and also for Ryan's Daughter. Those are the kind of examples of a filmmaker asking a particular composer to provide particular music. But there is a third element. There are directors who use particular pieces of music to supplement all this. Now, for instance, one of my favorite directors is Terrence Malick. He uses pieces of music from very arcane sources. You have him using the music of Arvo Pärt, who is a Finnish composer, or of Gorecki, who is a Polish composer. And it's very interesting that these are the composers
who are also the favorites of
other famous directors.
So you can't
clump all these kinds of films as music.
You have
the original music which is diegetic.
You have the music which is asked by a composer for a specific film. And there are
pieces of music that they are using for
a particular
reason.
Now I would
again come back to something that I mentioned earlier.
Zwaya
Gimser
is a particular
director who uses music very, very carefully.
In his last
film,
he used
a particular piece of music
which he commissioned. He asked for a group
Galapparine, Evgeny Galapparine and
Sacha
Galapparine.
And he asked
them to make a particular composition called
11
cycles of E.
E being the note. And that particular
piece of music is used in his latest film called Loveless.
It is so dramatic
that the European Awards
gave a special
award for that composition.
Because they found that particular piece of music was almost like a character. You can hear that piece of music on YouTube,
and you realize how important
a commissioned
piece of music can be,
and add value
to the entire film.
So these are things
which might escape a casual viewer.
But when you point them out, the viewer can go back and watch the film again and relish it, because it might have escaped him or her.
And young filmmakers may also begin to appreciate the use of music, to be able to use the right music at the right time, or in case of the diegetic music, not to use a commission music and just use the real sounds, depending on what's required in a particular scenario or a particular film. Reading a review like that enriches that experience. It helps him or her develop that understanding, which I think can be pivotal in pursuing a career of his or her own in the times to come. So I personally have always felt that good reviews can also channelize the creative voice in you. Reading a good review can even inspire people to not just take a film criticism. They can also inspire people to make movies of their own. And we have seen that how many good critics in the past actually ended up donning the filmmaker's hat, and they made some very important films. You've seen the case of the Kayers people. We have had examples in India of so many people who were film writers or critics to begin with, but then gradually they were able to etch out a career in film business, probably because of what they read to begin with. Because I'm sure in the absence of good writings available, you will inevitably miss a lot of these nuances, a lot of these undercurrents that would obviously go unnoticed if there is nobody to point them out in the first place. And that's precisely why I personally have been very fortunate in following your blog. There are others also, a few other critics also, whom I have been following very closely. But with your blog, the thing is that I always end up discovering something new or the other. Whether, like in the case of The Swimmer, I learned so many interesting things about this writer and how she was able to contribute and elevate the material, and how Burt Lancaster inevitably fired the existing director and Sidney Pollack came in and shot those few scenes, and which ultimately helped elevate the film above the material. And in the case of musical composers, Peter Weir using certain music, or Ennio Morricone using certain, Terence Malick, because I have not seen any critic or film scholar in the world who has interpreted Terence Malick better for me than you. Your reviews of The Tree of Life, your reviews of Thin Red Line, and even other films of Malick, they are really masterpieces within their own right. They help you understand Malick at a completely different level. So now that we are coming towards the end of this conversation, I would like you to talk about those other filmmakers that we haven't been able to include in this conversation. Your favorite filmmakers like Raul Ruiz, and other filmmakers that you feel deserve a mention, and yet not many people talk about them.
Well, I would like to start with Naomi Kawase. She's a Japanese director who has made. I call her the Terrence Malick of Japan, because she was able to do what Terrence Malick has done. That is, write their own script, use nature as a major part of the story, and talk about family. If Tree of Life was all about family, and all the films of Naomi Kawase are all about the family. If you look at Zweigans, it's all about family. So it's something that has interlinked. Now even the film Jugu trilogy of Kaplana is all about the family. And the Yusuf trilogy of Kaplana was all male oriented. And now Semi Kaplana has changed his track. And he's talking about the family from the female point of view. As in his latest film, The Commitment. And so there's lot of interesting things happening. And so as another famous director from Turkey, Nuri Bilge Ceylan or Ceylan. Now his films are also very interesting. And his later films are again about family. And he deals with a small group of people to make the films. And that's another interesting.
I think his wife is his co-writer also, or one of the major writers.
Yeah, he uses his wife, and she's a director in her own right. And she always fights with him and says that you have shortened the script. But he would say, no, I want it longer. He told me this directly when I asked him a question. And his scripts with his wife are very interesting. For instance, I would take a diversion here and talk about his film called The Wild Pear Tree.
Mm-hmm.
Now there is something that, as a Muslim director, taken a very bold step. I mean, most of the Muslims that we know of would talk about the usual word, inshallah. If you talk about a Christian, he would talk about God's willing. I mean, my favorite singer who was a Jew, Leonard Cohen, would say, "Be thy will." And here is Ceylan in this film talking about free will. Wow. And he puts it in the mouth of two imams conversing about free will.
Wow.
I thought it was extraordinary.
It gives me goosebumps.
Not many people would do that. And here is somebody I can really admire because his wife and he has taken a very bold step, and it's being appreciated. So there are a lot of filmmakers around the world. Now there is a film being made in Africa, mm-hmm. which are very interesting. There's a film that's called The Night of the Kings. I think it's up for the Oscars. I don't know whether it will finally get the nomination. And it's made by a director who is making a film on a prison in Côte d'Ivoire, which is Ivory Coast. Now he is writing the entire story because he used to visit that very prison.
where his mother was interned for political reasons. And he is able to make a fantastic film from all the information that he collected. And it is an absolutely superb film. And another film from say, Lesotho, which is a small country in southern Africa. It's a film about how people are going to be displaced with a new dam which is going to be built. And that is amazingly made by an actress playing the lead role who is in her 80s.
Wow.
And that film won the top award at the International Film Festival of Kerala a few weeks ago. I had, of course, written about it before that. But it was wonderful to see such interesting work coming out from different parts of the world. You have Carlos Regadas, who is a filmmaker from Mexico.
Yeah, Silent Light.
Who can really take you into a different world. If you are a person who goes into a cinema theater and is not bothered about eating your popcorn or your cold drink, but are totally interested in the sounds and details. I was sitting next to a person while watching his Silent Light. And the person who was sitting next to him was chatting away. But the beginning of Silent Light, you have absolute silence. And then it slowly takes in the sounds of the forest in the night. And at the end of the film, he reverses it. So importance of concentration. Where you're seeing a series is paramount. And then you can really enjoy a good film. But the critics need to point this out. That in a good film, you can't come into a theater and start talking. You have to give some sort of respect for the others who are watching the film.
Mm-hmm.
And then you yourself can enjoy the film a lot better. So these are the kind of filmmakers that are really making a lot of name for themselves, and a different from what earlier filmmakers were doing. I mean, these are people who are sometimes and very often writing their own original screenplays. Now, I always respect a director who writes his original screenplay, and then you are able to make slight changes while you are filming, and that gives you a lot of leeway to make a spectacular film. And I would always say that a good film can also be made by adapting a good story.
Hmm.
But that requires a certain kind of knowledge and expertise that not everybody has. For instance, I would say Konchalovsky. Another one of my favorites from Russia. He is a person who does have that. He would add on a very interesting end quote, or start with a interesting quote. Very often in the case of Konchalovsky, I think always at the end. He made a film called The Runaway Train.
Ah, yeah.
Which most people would just think it was just an escape movie from the prison. It is. But much more. And at the end of the film, he adds on a quotation
from Shakespeare.
Richard III.
And talks about
beasts in us
and the way we behave. And this is very important
because
at the end
of the film,
the quotation
makes you look back
at what you had
been shown,
and then reevaluate your own emotions
while you're watching.
Who was
the beast?
And was the beast
really a beast?
And the same thing
he does with, say,
a later film called
Postman's White Knight.
He ends that
film
also with
a Shakespearean quote.
This time from
Tempest.
And it is
shown after
a last sequence where you have a rocket being fired. When the entire film was earlier on all about the
Russia.
Now you put
that
piece of information from
Tempest.
The quotation from
Tempest.
And put it in context
with what you have watched.
The film takes a
totally new meaning.
And he is a director who has been working with of late with
a particular scriptwriter called Elena Kiseleva.
And I have noticed that
ever since they have started working together,
the kind of
his scripts have improved.
And I'm not saying
that Konchalovsky is not a great scriptwriter.
Konchalovsky was
the scriptwriter for the early Tarkovsky films.
And here is
Andrei Rublev,
important scriptwriter,
choosing to write
with another script,
and increasing
the value of the film.
The same thing happens.
With
Kieslowski.
Yeah.
Kieslowski's
last few films
after he made
Decalogue
were made with
a particular scriptwriter
called Pisevich. And if you notice,
the quality of his films
after he joined
hands with Pisevich
just went
up
and up.
I remember you telling me that how the other guy could narrate the stories but couldn't write it. So he would narrate it to Kieslowski, who would in turn write them down, and the two collaborated and it really helped Kieslowski in making far superior cinema to say what he was doing a decade earlier.
That's right. Most importantly, Kieslowski
always said that he was an atheist.
And I guess I've not met
this Pisevich.
I guess he's a very
religious person.
And that's why you have
Decalogue,
which is basically on the Ten Commandments. And you have blue. The three colors blue.
About faith.
Which is on a particular
chapter of the Bible.
Called the Corinthians. So there is definitely added value. Where you collaborate
with an interesting co-scriptwriter.
And it's sometimes
these directors work in teams.
For instance, I've talked
earlier also about Zweigen's working with his scriptwriter Oleg Negin.
They not only have
a scriptwriter as a team,
but they also have a
good cinematographer.
Also as a team. So a good cinematographer
in the team can also add value.
The
Chelon, or how you pronounce it,
Nuri
has a very good
cinematographer called Gokhan Tigre.
And he is again
a very good cinematographer.
Wow,
and it sticks with him. And even Kochalovsky had a very famous cinema called Simona. And he usually uses him. So it's a very good, it's a team effort of many of these major filmmakers that made all these great films. It's not just a work of one film or one person. It is always a team effort. And that is often not seen by many people.
Sir, I think this session will serve as a primer to many more sessions that I would love to have with you, because we are talking about an encyclopedic scope of understanding cinema, and you cannot obviously sum it all up in one session. But I think this is a great primer, and we can have many more sessions. But one question I wanted to ask: I know a lot of young filmmakers, a lot of established filmmakers all around the world. They write to you. They write to you requesting you to watch their films. They write to you requesting you to review their films. But I know the kind of films that make to your blog, ultimately, they're a very, very selective lot. They're a very, very eclectic lot. So what do they do in order for you to, direct your attention towards their work? Any criteria that they need to follow which will increase the probability of their films getting featured on your blog?
Well, it's something that I can't answer. They have to tell me why they are contacting. And I have to tell them that I can't write about every film. I have to really appreciate what they're doing to write about them. So it's a question of both these factors. But I have been blessed by many of these directors approaching me to look at the films before at a very early stage. And I have written a few reviews after seeing the films at their request. And there are many that I have not, for the reasons I just explained.
So I think if you really want to make your film watched by Jugu sir, if you want your films to be reviewed by Jugu sir, you can contact him through his blog. His blog's name is Movies That Make You Think, and I'll also be sharing the link to the blog in the comment section in this discussion. So you can always write to him, and even if he is not in a position to review your film, he will obviously be, at least giving you certain parameters, certain guidelines, if he can, which may help you maybe work towards a better project next time around, or if there are certain improvements. So you can always reach out to him. Even though he is busy, he will still try to accommodate your request if he can. And sir, thank you so much for taking the time out. It has been a really, really wonderful conversation. I, on behalf of the entire Transcontinental Times team, which is based in Madrid, would like to thank you for making yourself available for this session and for enlightening us all with these intricate details and with these profound theories about the world of film. I personally have really benefited from our interactions. I remember when I met you for the first time back in 2013, I think, at your Trivandrum house. It has been an enlightening journey for me ever since then, and even before that, when I used to follow your blog on a regular basis. And I tell this to anyone and everyone that I meet, that you have had a profound influence on my career as a film critic, on my understanding of cinema. Even today, when I feel a little lost, I always come to you, I always come to your blog, and personally, it has been thoroughly rewarding. And so thank you so much for doing this, and looking forward to many more sessions. And as and when you are available, we would request you, and we would choose a certain topic. Like today, it was maybe writing a review. We can also touch upon other facets of writing a film review, or how to make a great film, and we can take it up in our future sessions as well. depending on your availability, of course.
Always a pleasure talking to you.
And I hope
that we always in touch about films.
A common
factor which unites us.
Thank you so much, sir. Bye, sir. Thank you so much, Technical Ahmed. So, viewers, ये थे Jugu Abraham, the one and only Jugu Abraham sir from Trivandrum, the renowned Indian film scholar and the author of the blog Movies That Make You Think. So, until the next time, this is Murtaza Ali Khan signing off. और मिलते हैं बहुत जल्दी with another interesting personality from the world of entertainment. Bye for now.